So thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to see you all. In addition to being a normal DEF CON talk, this is actually also the last stop in a book tour that I've been on since April. 35 cities, 3 countries. This is my final resting place on this tour. I've been waiting since April the 4th to tell this joke. I am now touring complete. And you are the only audience that I could tell that joke to. So it's uniquely appropriate that I finish here. So as a little bit of housekeeping, when this is done, apropos the tour, I'll be signing copies of my book Walkaway in the retailer's room at the No Starch booth. They very kindly brought in a few hundred copies of Walkaway, and I hope to see you there. But let's screw the bougie commerce and let's get down to brass tacks here. In November 2013, a guy named Tom Wheeler was appointed to run the Federal Communications Commission. He was a former cable lobbyist who is now going to be in charge of regulating the cable industry. Memorably, John Oliver went on TV to explain why this might not be a bad idea, called Tom Wheeler a dingo babysitter. And then a funny thing happened on the way to regulation, which is that millions and millions of people called the FCC and wrote to the FCC and called their congressman and showed up in person and showed up outside Tom Wheeler's house every day at the end of his driveway with signs. And then on February 26, 2015, Tom Wheeler created a Title II rule for network neutrality that said that ISPs couldn't give preference to different packets based on who had bribed them the most to carry them to you. He also said that states that had passed laws that said that cities couldn't provide their own networks to compete with the crummy overpriced networks that the monopolies were provided, that those states were violating the FCC's rules, and that cities, if they wanted to, could create networks for the people who lived in them. And then, yeah, that was good news. The story gets dark though, because on January the 20th, Donald Trump was sworn in. Yeah, I know. And he appointed a new dingo babysitter, a guy named Ajit Pai, also a former cable lobbyist. And he hated network neutrality and announced that his first order of business would be dismantling it. And on July 12th, 8 million people sent comments to the FCC about this, significantly more than had ever lobbied the FCC on it a year before. Now, we don't know what Pai is going to do at this point. We don't know if we're winning or losing the fight for network neutrality. But winning or losing is the wrong way to understand this kind of problem. Because political process, like security, is a process and not a product. And it's a process governed by 4 forces. Lawrence Lessig wrote this book, Code and the Other Laws of Cyberspace, in 1999, in which he said that our world is regulated by code. That's what's technologically possible. Markets, that's what's profitable. Law, what's legal. And norms, what's socially acceptable. And what happens in our world is the result of those 4 factors coming together: law, code, norms, and markets. So let's look at where net neutrality stands according to Lessig's analysis. Well, code. Tim Wu, who coined the term network neutrality, old school chum of mine. I lost touch with him for 20 years. He sent me an email saying, I've just found you on the internet, and by the way, I'm really sorry for shooting your dwarf in the back with a crossbow in 1980. Tim Wu went to work for the Federal Trade Commission, not the Federal Trade Commission, the New York Attorney General's office, and distributed open source tools to New Yorkers to measure network performance across the internet service being offered by the duopoly in New York State. And he sent an open letter to Time Warner Cable saying, in advertisement after advertisement, Time Warner promised a, quote, blazing fast, super reliable internet connection. Yet it appears the company has been failing to take adequate or necessary steps to keep pace with the demand of the Time Warner Cable customers. At times, letting communicate connections with key internet content providers become so congested that large volumes of internet data were regularly lost or discarded. So code is on our side, right? Now we know the full extent of cable company fuckery. We can measure it and report on it to the byte level in real time. So code is looking good. How about law? Law is looking dubious. So we have this Title II rule, it's a year old. What the FCC can and can't do is set by law. Congress would need to pass a new law in order to change how the FCC works. Congress is not going to pass any laws anytime soon. I don't know if you've noticed, but they're not making laws these days. And so the law is kind of ambivalent, because maybe Ajit Pai can get the commissioners to vote down Title II, maybe not. We'll see. Certainly there's a lot of people who've put him on notice that this would be a terrible idea. And while we were away, while the network neutrality rule was in place, what happened was the cable operators started to get on investor phone calls where they had to make full disclosures or face personal criminal liability under Dodd-Frank. So lying on those phone calls can send you to jail. And they started to say something really different when they could go to jail for lying than they did when they were just talking to the press. And what they started to say was, actually, network neutrality doesn't matter. We're going to build out our networks no matter what. Our investment is strong. It doesn't matter if this rule is in place or not. So we do have some pretty good facts and evidence that we can bring to the likes of Ajit Pai, who says that network neutrality causes underinvestment in American broadband. Now, how about markets? Markets are really in serious trouble here. Right? The most concentrated industry, the first really concentrated modern industry is telecoms. And they're buying online companies now. So the companies used to fight them to say, don't congest your pipes on purpose to stop our customers from seeing our pages. Those companies are now part of the phone companies. So like Verizon owns Tumblr now. Tumblr was one of the great proponents of network neutrality a year ago. This year they were a little weak-kneed. Or Netflix, right? Netflix, a year ago, Netflix led the charge on network neutrality. This year, on one of those phone calls where you have to tell the truth or you go to jail, CEO said very frankly, network neutrality is not as important to the survival of our business as it was a year ago. Because everyone loves Netflix now. And if a cable operator started to screw with Netflix, they would face so much backlash from our customers who are their customers that we could probably win that fight. Now, we'll still fight for network neutrality, but it's not an existential threat for us. And even taking him at his word, and I don't know why you wouldn't take him at his word, I think he's telling the truth. I think it's facially obvious that Netflix will fight harder for something that is an existential threat to the business than they will for something they view as a good idea. So that's bad news. But how about norms? Norms are where the good news starts. Right? People care about network neutrality. Saying that network neutrality is not a good idea makes you sound like a colossal asshole. Network neutrality is counted as a victory won that people have a stake in defending, as opposed to some weird idea, which it was a year ago, that most people weren't even sure what it was. 8 million people sent comments to the FCC about network neutrality. There is evidence in hand that network neutrality does not impact telecoms infrastructure investment. And norms are huge. We have millions of Americans who in the last year have formed strong opinions about telecoms policy. I mean, even I find it difficult to remain engaged when people are talking about telecoms. So are we winning or losing on telecoms policy? Well, both. Last year we leveraged norms to win a legal battle. This year the legal side pushed back, helped by the markets, and government got bought out by big telco. But this year we've got bigger norms to push back with because the politicians who got bought out by big telco, they also got elected by online groundswells, netroots groups that really care about network neutrality. And the politicians may also realize that incumbency is better served by a controllable internet than by a wild one, right? Having achieved victory and gotten elected by insurgent grassroots movements, they would like those insurgent grassroots movements to just go away so they don't throw them out and put someone new in their seat. So it's hard to know, but we don't need to know. We don't need to pay attention because winning or losing is the wrong sort of question. The right question is, how do we win more than we are right now And how do we make our adversaries lose more than they are right now? This is a security problem. It is a process and not a product. When you're red teaming your adversaries, you look for weak points and you attack them with your strengths. And our strength on network neutrality is norms. Network neutrality is not about regulating the internet. Telecoms is regulation. If you think about what a telecom is, it's a bunch of rules saying you're allowed to go and stick poles on every corner and dig up every sidewalk of every city in America, along with all of the rights of way along all the railroad tracks in America, at knockdown prices without having to negotiate with every retailer, every individual, every government for the right to dig up that sidewalk. And in exchange, you get to be our phone company. Without a regulation, there is no phone company, right? You can't go gulp with your phone company and pay market rates for your sidewalk clearance. I mean, maybe you could, but $1 trillion later, you'd still be arguing with that one person in Brooklyn who wants artisanal sidewalk digging and refuses to let your guys in to dig it up and complete your last mile. So we're not arguing about whether there should be regulation. We're just arguing about whether the regulation should serve the public or the telecoms giants who've been profiting at the expense of the public. Who will win this time? It's the wrong question. I mean, it would rock to get Ajit Pai to do a total climb down on his hardcore commitment to destroy net neutrality, but it would also rock for him to screw over network neutrality and then take his ass to court and hand him his ass in the courtroom. Either one would be a huge morale boost. Either one would do great on the normative side. Either one would create a lot more net neutrality stakeholders who thought of themselves as pirates, not as admirals. Because remember, every pirate wants to be an admiral. And yesterday's pirates always turn into admirals who say, when I did it, that was totally legit. When you do it, that's totally wrong. So telecoms competition advocates, we thought we'd won in 1982 when we got AT&T broken up. We thought we'd won when the net heads beat the bell heads at AT&T and circuit switching declined and packet switching grew. But then the carriers came back because of course they did. Our victory over AT&T, our victory over packet switching, neither one of those things turned all those greedy anti-competitive supervillains to become like Buddhists. Right? They didn't lose, they just had a technical, legal, business, and normative setback. And so they worked at the margins, like Lord Voldemort lurking on the back of someone's head, waiting to find a new body, bringing their powers back to bear. And it helped, of course, that finance capital devoured the world around the same time, meaning they had fewer and fewer limits on the ways that they could use raw cash to buy political outcomes. Maybe we'll be able to outspend them. Maybe we'll be able to buy more politicians than them because the total value of the ecosystem that they want to strangle with their nutricidal ways exceeds the market cap of all the telecoms companies by orders of magnitudes. They just own the pipes. The stuff that's in the pipes is what matters. But every pirate wants to be an admiral. And so the insurgents who are bankrolling net neutrality fights today will become tomorrow's telecom chums. Happy to slip big ISP a few bucks for premium carriage if it means the upstart competitors that threaten to do to them what they did to last year's pirates can be walled off from their customers. It's like that last line in Animal Farm. The creatures looked from the pig to the man, and from the man to the pig, and from the pig to the man again, and already it was impossible to say which was which. So it's useless to ask if we're winning or losing, and it's also useless to ask whether the companies are on our side or not. Coke does not want to buy the world a Coke. Companies are not on our side. The right question is, how do we get companies to see that our side is in their temporary advantage? And when can we rely on companies to help us out? So let's apply that to some other issues, like backdoors. So EFF, we made our bones fighting backdoors. 1992, we won this Bernstein lawsuit where Daniel J. Bernstein, DJB, had published source code that allowed him to implement a cipher stronger than the one that the NSA thought civilians should have access to. And at the time, everybody thought that it was a hopeless fight. EFF brought a legal challenge. We said that DJB had the First Amendment right to publish source code, that source code was a form of expressive speech that programmers used to express their ideas. And the Ninth Circuit at the lower division and the appellate division both upheld us. And crypto has been legal to use since then. That's why this con exists. That's why your jobs exist. You know, the odds were stacked against us in markets, in norms, and in code. You know, there was this idea that DES 50, this very weak cipher, would be enough to defend all of American business, all of American enterprise, all of American activity. And we would say, well, that cipher's super weak and it doesn't work. And the congressional oversight for the NSA would say, well, the NSA has hired all the best mathematicians who graduated from all the best universities for 30 years, and they say it's fine. Who the hell are you? So, you know, we set out to prove it. John Gilmore helped found EFF, early employee at Sun Microsystems. He built a computer called a DES cracker. He built a computer that for $250,000 could brute force the whole key space of DES 50 in 2 hours. And he said, this is the cost of pwning the entire American finance system, as well as all of our political communications, as well as all of our personal communications. $250,000, 2 hours, right? That is a good return on your investment. Everybody should build a DES cracker. But it didn't help. Now, what did help was arguing that the First Amendment protected programmers. And the First Amendment obviously only applies in America. I'm not an American, I'm a Canadian. We're like serial killers. We look like everybody else and we're everywhere. But the First Amendment turned out to have a way that it could apply to everyone in the world, which is that once the US made it legal to make strong crypto, it became the guardian of the world's working cryptography. Any other country that proposed to ban working cryptography would have people show up and say, it doesn't matter if you ban working cryptography because the US will just keep exporting strong crypto to our constituencies, and all that you'll get is that our industry won't be able to participate in the crypto marketplace. So these US fights, they're really important. That's why people all over the world watch so closely when the FBI tried to get Apple to backdoor its phones to read what the San Bernardino killers had been talking about before they went on their shooting spree. So what does Lessig's 4 factors have to say about backdoors? How about norms? Well, we've had these super high-powered breaches lately. There was Vault 7, there was a Shadow Brokers, and those gave rise to things like WannaCry, right, where you have this ransomware worm that's shutting down key systems all over the world. And one of the things that rarely got discussed in the world of WannaCry is what the ransom was. Does anyone know how much the ransom was in dollars? $300, right? These guys were seizing whole hospitals and asking for $300. This was not Lex Luthor. These guys were dum-dums, right? They were dum-dums who got their hands on super weapons developed at taxpayer expense, right? All of a sudden, people woke up and said, maybe the idea that vulnerabilities that governments discover in commonly used systems that they don't patch, maybe those will get independently discovered or leaked and used by dum-dums. Not just like North Korea, but like that crackhead who broke your car window for the quarter you left on your dashboard is going to get their hands on these crazy cyber weapons. They're in the normative sphere, there's no evidence of anyone going dark. Right? Every time law enforcement is made to show its work when it says, you know, we can't police anyone anymore because the terrorists are going dark, and you ask them like, have the terrorists gone dark? Like, where's your evidence of it? They're like, well, they haven't gone dark yet. I mean, technically, we just keep being able to spy on everyone all the time. And like, you know, the Paris attackers, they ditched a laptop in a garbage can with an unencrypted hard drive and a folder on the desktop labeled secret terror plans. But someday they're gonna go dark. I mean, we know it, right? Like, someday this plane might crash, and that's why I'm gonna eat my seatmate now. So, the normative side is looking pretty good, but it's not perfect. There's lots of hysteria about the darknet. If any of you saw Roger Dingledine talk yesterday about darknet hysteria, it's totally true that that ransomware and cryptocurrencies have become the inseparable peanut butter and chocolate of shitty crime in the 21st century. And not only that, but like it's also become the thing that real world kidnappers are now using to cash out on their kidnappings, bitcoins and other coins. So it's a mixed bag on norms. How about markets? Well, the market news is pretty good. It turns out that people want products that protect their privacy. Full disk encryption is now standard. WhatsApp is implementing end-to-end encryption for billions of messaging users all around the world and putting competitive pressure on everyone else to match them and exceed them. But the bad news is that there's still a lot of money to be made from spying on your customers. Last year, Heinrich Moltke and others reported that AT&T were making tens of millions of dollars a year selling their customers' data secretly and illegally to the NSA. And the zero-day trade is alive and well. And countries around the world that are not well technologically developed and have no IT capacity to speak of are nevertheless able to enact super ambitious mass surveillance programs, like in Ethiopia, where they buy in tools from companies like Hacking Team to spy on everyone in the country, even though no indigenous well-developed IT industry exists, they can still spy like Americans. So the market side, it's a bit of a mixed bag. How about the law? Well, Bernstein's still the law of the land. It was challenged a bit in 2000 over the 2600 case, but it's still there. We have some hard cases that have come up on crypto. None have gone all the way through the courts, which is good because hard cases make bad law. Judges are often willing to say people who commit acts of terror aren't entitled to privacy and are indifferent to all the people who didn't commit an act of terror who will be implicated by that privacy decision. We have a burgeoning idea around the world that the law should not protect cryptography and in fact should mandate that no one should have access to working cryptography. You may have seen that Australia has planned in an upcoming meeting of the Five Eyes countries, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the US, and the UK, to propose that all 5 of those countries ban working crypto and mandate backdoors in all of their products. That wasn't enough. The Prime Minister of Australia recently said in public with a straight face that the laws of mathematics are all well and good, but the law in Australia is the law of Australia. Nerds, nerd harder. In the UK, they passed a surveillance bill that makes 1984 look like a manual for statecraft. China has banned VPNs, and the major app stores, including Google's and Apple's, are collaborating to remove VPNs that aren't man-in-the-middle from mobile app stores. So the law side not looking so good. The code side, well, the code side obviously looks great because crypto works, right? Crypto works. Now the bad news is that increasingly we are using devices that don't see themselves as your servants, but as your adversaries, right? Devices that are designed to make sure that you only use one kind of printer cartridge, or that you only tie into one app store ecosystem, or in some other way that you conduct your affairs to the benefit of the shareholders of the company that made the product instead of your own. And in those cases, those devices are designed to run code that you're not supposed to even know is there, and that if you know is there, you can't find, and that if you find it, you can't disable it or change it. Because if you can go in and say, like, I'd like to buy my apps from a different store, please, then that whole model breaks down. And then in the middle, we have some reasonably okay news for the code side, where we're getting really good examples of how bad code really puts people at risk. There's iTunes the updater mechanism being used by FinFisher to push malware. This was a product they sold to governments. You could push malware into iTunes instances by masquerading as a software update. That immediately triggered better security practices on the part of Apple and was a warning to everyone who has unauthenticated software updates that this is bad news and could make really hard problems for your customers and your business. So backdoors, kind of in the middle. We've got a little strength on the norm side. The law side's okay. The code side looks amazing. Let's use code to try and push the law. Now, how about DRM? Section 12.1 of the DMCA, the war on general purpose computing, right? The idea, the very dumb idea, that I can give you a device that has a key to decrypt messages from me, but that key is hidden in the device somehow, so that only programs that I provide can access that key. And those programs will do what I tell them to, like throw away the clear text when it's done. That idea is like completely bankrupt. We don't hide keys and equipment that we give to our adversaries for the same reason that we don't keep bank safes in bank robbers' living rooms, right? Because this is not Alice and Bob and Carol or Alice and Bob and Eve. It's just Alice and Bob, right? Alice is like anyone in the world who wants to get a Netflix account, and Bob is Netflix. And Bob gives anyone who signs up for a Netflix account a copy of the Netflix client with the Netflix keys hidden in it and hopes that none of those Alices, including like the bored grad students with an electron tunneling microscope, nothing to do in a weekend, and a bunch of undergrads hanging around like a bad smell, that none of them look too hard at that stuff that Netflix just gave them and figure out where the keys are. So DRM is dumb, but it's not harmless. Because of the very fragility of DRM advocates, the companies that like DRM, they're not interested in the technology of DRM. They're not interested in making proprietary software that hides decryption keys from the users and discards clear text. What they really want is the law that comes with DRM. So once you make DRM and put it in a product, once you have a means of access control for a copyrighted work, you can invoke laws like Section 1201 of the DMCA in the US. In Europe, it's implementations of Article 6 of the EUCD. I could go on. Every country in the world except Israel has a law that bans breaking DRM. The US Trade Representative had other priorities in respect of Israel. And these laws, they say that tampering with a copyright lock, disabling that copyright lock, weakening that copyright lock, are both criminal and civil acts. And in the US, it's a $500,000 fine and a 5-year prison sentence for a first offense for weakening a digital lock on a copyrighted work. So what this law has come to mean is that a corporation can force you to use your property in the way that they want you to on pain of felonization of your activity. If a phone vendor can make more money by making sure that you only buy apps from them and not from a third-party store and not directly from a software vendor, all they need to do is design their phone so that using anyone else's app store requires bypassing DRM. And now, using another app store is a felony. So conceptually, there's no principle here that separates deciding whose apps you can use on a phone that you own from whose bread you can use in a toaster you own. We are one vision system away from toasters that reject unauthorized bread, right? We are one RFID system away from a dishwasher that rejects unauthorized dishes. You can make every argument that people make for app stores, for toasters, for dishwashers, right? Your toaster could burn your house down if you stuck a bagel in it. That's why we have to make sure that you're only putting in authorized bread. Your dishwasher could kill you with a foodborne illness if we can't fully sterilize your dishes. That's why you can only use authorized dishes. But that's not the way it works in property regimes. In property, if it's your property, you're supposed to be able to decide what you do with it. If having software and DRM in a device means you don't get to decide how you use your property, it stops being your property. You know, the definition that every law school teaches about what property is Blackwell on property. Property is that thing of the world in which man possesses sole and despotic dominion to the exclusion of all other men in the universe, right? You do not have sole and despotic dominion over things that you aren't allowed to configure and use in the way that suits you best. Now, a bonus side effect of this, from the perspective of the manufacturers, is they get to threaten security researchers just like you. Because if I know about a defect in a DRM system, I know how to start unraveling that DRM system, removing that DRM system. And so these researchers have successfully argued that weakening a DRM system by publishing security vulnerability reports is also a felony. And at this conference, a security researcher was dragged off stage by the FBI and put in jail for reporting on defects in a DRM system. The chilling effect of DRM is alive and well. Security researchers in 2015 went to the US Copyright Office to report that they are sitting on vulnerabilities, not disclosing vulnerabilities in medical implants, in farming vehicles, in passenger vehicles, in voting machines, and more, because they're worried about getting jailed or sued for disclosing defects in DRM. And all of these things have DRM in them because it lets the manufacturers constrain how they're used. So where do we stand on DRM? Well, code. It's not hard to break DRM. It's a fool's errand to make DRM, and that's never going to change. How about markets? Well, there's more DRM than ever because it's an attractive nuisance. We've said to companies, add DRM, tell your customers how to use your products. It's making bank for those companies. GM uses DRM to lock up the telemetry on their cars and charges $75,000 for a tool to read out the telemetry on your own car. Now, this has huge costs for other sectors of the economy. If you want to start a business to repair electronics or cars or whatever, you can't do that without the sufferance and say-so of the original manufacturers. Those businesses are local by definition. No one sends their car to India or China to get it fixed. They don't even send their phones to China or India to get them fixed. And repair jobs are much better than breaking up this electronics and recycling it. A ton of e-waste produces 15 jobs if it's recycled. It produces 200 jobs if it's repaired. It's on-share and it's local. But the markets are fighting back to make DRM the rule and to stop these local businesses and these local jobs from occurring. But markets could be a force for breaking DRM. A team of researchers at the University of Glasgow published a paper that we helped them get funding for by writing a letter in support of them. Economists and other kinds of data scientists, where they scraped a product category in Amazon, DVD players, to look at how the presence of an illegal circumvention feature affects the price of a DVD player. And what they found is that if you compare a set of DVD players on Amazon of similar vintage with similar numbers of reviews and similar overall ratings, that the ones that have a primitive DRM circumvention feature sell at a 50% premium compared to the ones that follow the rules on DVD DRM. Now, the actual margin for a DVD player is in the realm of 2%. So you can increase your profits by 25-fold just by adding minimal DRM breaking features. So that's the market story. It could be good if we could convince companies, local businesses, that they should be bold and think about fighting to break DRM and standing up for the rights of their customers and the rights of their communities. But it's pretty terrible because big companies have figured out they can get a lot bigger if they can use DRM to force you to only conduct your affairs to their benefit. How about norms? Well, we are definitely at the point of peak indifference to DRM. Every day there's a new horrific DRM story. People wake up and they say, I had no idea that that's what that meant. Whether it's HP pushing a fake security update to millions of inkjet owners that was posed as a thing to protect your network stack in your printer, but was actually a thing that could detect and reject third-party ink cartridges, or people finding out that they can't make closed-loop insulin pumps because the DRM on one or both parts of it prevents them from bypassing it to link up a glucose monitor and an insulin pump. People are increasingly aware that this is a ripoff. People are increasingly aware that telling security researchers that they're not allowed to disclose defects in products that are intimately woven in your life does not make you more secure. How about the law? Well, the law is a mixed bag too. A year ago, Electronic Frontier Foundation sued the US government to invalidate Section 12.1 of the DMCA. We brought our lawsuit on behalf of two people you may have heard of, two of my favorite people in the world. One is Andrew Bunny Huang. You may know him as the Xbox hacker. He's a dude. The other one is Matthew Green at Johns Hopkins. And together they represent a set of legal challenges to Section 12.1 of the DMCA that will comprehensively demolish it if we win our suit. The government filed a motion to dismiss. The courts have been sitting on the motion. We have reason to believe we'll hear from them in the next month or so. There's a thing where judges have to reply within a certain number of months or they get censured by their peers. The period in which that censure is going to come up ends at the end of August. So we think we'll probably hear pretty soon. We'll have more to say then. There's a new 1201 study from the Library of Congress and the Copyright Office that suggests that the DMCA horrifically overreaches, and they've made it really easy for people like you to ask for exceptions to the DMCA to let you do your work. If you look at EFF's website, you can find more information on that. Now, this is the time in the talk where, having given you the lay of the land, I'm supposed to tell you something very anodyne and generic about what we should do next. Like, you should donate to EFF, which you should do. You should tell your friends, which you should do. You should write good code, which you should do. And that's all good advice, but this time I have a specific, actionable thing that you can do when you get back to work on Monday that will make a huge difference. So there's an organization you've all heard of and that you probably feel good about, like I do. I think that they're an amazing organization called the World Wide Web Consortium, the leading proponent of open standards on the web, the W3C. They're where most of the code that we write for the web is standardized. And since 2013, the W3C has pursued a course that I think was really unwise and whose unwiseness becomes more clear with every day. They decided to allow themselves to be used to make a DRM standard for web video. That means that the entertainment companies and the DRM vendors who joined the W3C could work with the browser vendors to form a patent pool that lets them make DRM for all browsers that works relatively seamlessly so that there isn't as much market pushback against it without facing any of the thorny antitrust scrutiny that they would get if they were just to go do that in a smoke-filled room. Now, EFF we joined and we tried and failed to convince them not to make DRM. So we offered a huge compromise. I think the biggest compromise in EFF's activist history. We said, go ahead if you must and make DRM. But don't let your members use the W3C process to seize control over the future of the web. We said, take your existing W3C IPR agreement. That's the one that says that members can't use their patents to attack people who implement W3C standards and do legitimate things with them, and expand it so that members also can't use the rights they get under DRM law to attack people doing legitimate things. Thank you. So this compromise, it doesn't stop W3C members from suing anyone who commits a copyright infringement, primary or secondary. It doesn't stop them from suing people who infringe their patents or their trademarks, or people who steal their trade secrets, or people who commit tortious interference with their agreements with their users. All it says is that W3C members can't use DRM as an excuse to threaten and silence security researchers. They can't use DRM to attack people who work to make video more accessible to people with disabilities. They can't use DRM to decide who can enter the market and with which products and services. They can't use DRM to stop legitimate activities like archiving videos. And dozens of members supported this compromise in a vote last March. The Royal National Institute for Blind People, Stony Brook University, the German National Library, cryptocurrency and blockchain companies, security research firms like Dan Kaminsky's White Ops, outside organizations like UNESCO, the Internet Archive, and the International Federation of Library Associations all came out to support this proposal. Hundreds of human rights groups from around the world, especially the Global South, supported it. And then this month, the W3C overruled every single one of those objections. So we have filed the first ever appeal in W3C history, and we need your help with it. Your employer, they dropped a couple grand to send you here to Nerd Summer Camp and put you up in a hotel. And it's not because they're big-hearted slobs. It's because they need you. Security experts are a non-fungible, highly scarce resource that is essential to the successful operation of every enterprise. In a world with millions of people looking for jobs, you are the people who have jobs looking for you. That's why your email inbox and your LinkedIn profile are filled with spammy requests from recruiters. And that gives you power that you can flex. And you need to flex it because you are under attack. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and other laws have become the rug that the inconvenient truths of the security research community are swept under. In a world in which security is an afterthought and billions are at risk, your ability to speak the truth about the dumb mistakes that companies make is under sustained, relentless assault. We can't afford a future in which billions of people use a browser with standardized DRM in it that no one is allowed to investigate and report on. So if you work for Google, remember that your company made its profits by integrating units like Blogger and YouTube and Search, whose only rule was only reference copyrighted works in accordance with the law, and not only use copyrighted works in ways that no one objects to. You got to do what was legal, not what didn't rock the boat. Go and find your Chrome security team and tell them that the ability of independent researchers to report on mistakes that put the whole web at risk is under assault. Remind them that Widevine, your implementation of this DRM, it was broken for 6 years before anyone had the guts to point it out. That person worked at a university in Israel, the only country that doesn't have a law banning disclosures about DRM. If you work for Mozilla, remember that there would be no Mozilla if rights holders had been successful in their bid to stop Moz from shipping a pop-up blocker that was on by default. Mozilla only exists because the rule is don't break the law, not don't rock the boat. Go and find your security team on Monday and remind them that they're working at a substantial discount of the market rate of their wage at a nonprofit because they believe in the open web. And Mozilla can save the open web by voting at the W3C for a rule that says that rights holders can't threaten security researchers. If you work for Apple, remember that rip, mix, burn is the origin story of the iPhone, and that Apple, as we know it today, depends on the ability to do what's legal, not what doesn't piss off rights holders. Go and find your Safari security team and remind them that spyware companies have used fake updates for Apple products to target dissidents on behalf of torturing regimes, and that we need to be able to disclose security defects in our products so we can catch that kind of shenanigans. Remind them that Apple, just like everybody else, makes mistakes, and security is a process and not a product, and the process requires that anyone be allowed to tell the truth about defects in Apple's products. No matter which browser vendor you work for, Microsoft or Baidu, remember that you will probably work for someone else eventually, and your ability to come up with amazing products that build on the stuff you did in your last job requires that you be allowed to do what's legal, not what your old boss would approve of. You are security researchers, you are the elite, and your employers need you. They sent you to DEF CON as a little bonus, like a parent sending a beloved child to summer camp, and I want you to go home from camp with a homemade ear piercing, a comprehensive vocabulary of shocking swear words, and a word-perfect knowledge of every song the Ramones ever wrote. I don't care how badly entertainment companies want DRM to be a thing. It's still bullshit. That doesn't make it harmless. DRM for web video will mean that, for example, no one can write code to scan ahead looking for strobes that could trigger seizures from people with photosensitive epilepsy. And that is not a theoretical risk. I wish I did have my slides, because I have a picture of my friend Jennifer. She works at my local mailbox, where I go and pick up my mail every day. And spontaneously, she started telling me about how she has photosensitive epilepsy, how she has 3 kids, how she likes to unwind with Netflix, and how 2 years ago, the worst seizure of her life, 5 grand mal consecutive seizures that landed her in hospital, were triggered by watching a Netflix video with a strobe effect in it. There are not enough human video watching hours remaining in our species to watch every video online and subtitle it, add assisted tracks to it, shift its gamma for people with color blindness, and find and tag the strobe effects. But we can make those things for video with code if we can run the code. If it's not a felony punishable by a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine to break the code. If the W3 steps up and tells the entertainment companies that the quid pro quo for getting to use the W3C to make DRM is they have to promise not to abuse the DMCA. So your employers need you. The reason you get to, 1 minute. The reason you get to go to work with facial piercings and blue hair and black t-shirts with vaguely menacing slogans on them and the janitors don't is not that you're more important than the janitors. The janitors are doing important security work. The reason you're not dead of listeria is that they do their job. The reason you get to do what you do and the janitors don't is that you have rare skills that your employer depends on. You have market power, and with power comes responsibility. Your job is to keep people safe. You signed up to make computers safe for people, not to help the cause of making people subservient to computers. When your boss wants you to make DRM, they are asking you to do something that is both delusional and dangerous. It is a catastrophically bad idea to design computers that treat their owners as their adversaries. And thankfully, it's also a catastrophically stupid idea. And that's why your boss is on the wrong side of history. The future won't be full of computers that are almost Turing complete, that run all the programs except for the ones that your boss doesn't like. Even though some quack convinced your boss that DRM is a thing, it's not a thing. I didn't come here today to make you feel shitty about your job, but if you feel shitty about your job right now, think about what you can do about it. We won't win this fight because it's not the kind of fight that you win. It's the kind of fight you fight forever. And that's what EFF is going to do with your help. Thank you.